Caleb's cabin was an ark built on a mountain of fear, designed to keep the water out. He had once been a man of the sea, his skin weathered by salt spray, his hands calloused from hauling nets under the vast Alaskan sky. But a single rogue wave, a monstrous gray wall of water that had stolen his boat and his best friend, had changed everything. It had spat him back onto the shore, alive but broken, and drowned the man he used to be. Now he lived in the Rocky Mountains, as far from the ocean as he could get. His fear, however, was not confined to the sea. It had become a fear of all water. He couldn't stand the rain. He avoided looking at the silver ribbon of the river that snaked through the valley below. He even collected drinking water from a small controlled spring instead of fetching it from the nearby creek. His world had shrunk to the dusty confines of his cabin and the dry trails around it. He was a fisherman who had become a prisoner of the mountain, haunted by the ghost of rushing water.
He was splitting firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a familiar comfort, when he heard it. A series of high-pitched, distressed chirps, like a frantic bird. But this was no bird. He followed the sound to a dried-up creek bed, a rocky scar on the landscape that only flowed during the spring melt. There, huddled beneath the roots of an ancient pine, was a river otter pup. It was small, its fur damp and muddy, its dark eyes wide with panic. It was completely alone, miles from the main river it called home. Caleb's heart, a thing he thought had turned to stone, lurched. He knew about otters. They were social, family creatures. A pup this young wouldn't survive a day on its own. Every instinct he had from his old life, the life of a man who respected nature's creatures, screamed at him to help. But helping meant one thing: taking it to the river, the very place his nightmares were made of. He stood there, torn between the compassion he felt for the tiny shivering creature and the tidal wave of terror that rose in his throat at the thought of the rushing water. He couldn't leave it. With a curse aimed at the cruel irony of the universe, he gently scooped the pup into his jacket and carried it back to his prison. He didn't have a name for it at first. It was just the pup. He fashioned a makeshift den for it in a wooden crate with old blankets and fed it some canned fish, which it devoured greedily. Its most desperate need, however, was for water to swim in. The thought of bringing river water to the cabin was unbearable, so he did the next best thing. He filled an old metal washtub with the precious water from its spring. The moment the pup saw the water, it was transformed. It dove in, a streak of slick, joyful energy, twisting and turning in the confined space. It would pop its head up, look at Caleb with its intelligent, whiskered face, and let out a happy chirp before disappearing again. Watching the otter's pure, unadulterated joy in the water was a strange form of torture for Caleb. It was a reminder of a world he had lost, a world where water meant life, not death. Yet he couldn't look away. The pup's relentless vitality began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. He started calling it Gus. The washtub was not enough. Gus was growing, and his playful energy was turning into a desperate restlessness. He needed a real river. He needed his family. Caleb knew he was only delaying the inevitable, and his delay could be a death sentence for the animal he had grown to care for. The debt had to be paid. The morning he chose to act was cold and clear. His hands trembled as he placed Gus into the crate. The walk down the mountain towards the river was a descent into his own personal hell. With every step, the sound of the water grew louder, from a distant whisper to a menacing roar. It was the sound from his nightmares. By the time he reached the riverbank, he was drenched in a cold sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The river was a churning, powerful beast, its currents pulling and swirling just like the wave that had taken everything. He froze, his boots feeling as if they were nailed to the ground. He saw it all again: the black water, The splintering wood, the desperate, fading face of his friend. He couldn't move. From inside the crate, Gus let out a long, plaintive cry. It wasn't a chirp of playfulness, but a call of deep, primal longing for its home. The sound cut through Caleb's paralyzing fear. It was the sound of a life he held in his hands, a life that would be lost if he surrendered to the ghosts of the past. He looked down at the crate, then out at the terrifying water. It was a debt, a life for a life. Taking a shuddering breath that felt like his first in years, Caleb took one deliberate step into the river. The icy water shocked his system, a jolt of pure physical sensation that momentarily silenced the ghosts. He took another step, then another, waiting until he was ankle deep. His legs shook violently, but he held his ground. He opened the crate. Gus scrambled out, hesitated for a second at the water's edge, then dove in without a backward glance. He watched the otter swim, a joyful, perfect arc in the current. And then he saw it. Another otter, then two more, emerged from the reeds downstream. Gus had found his family. He stood there, the river flowing around his ankles, the cold seeping into his bones. But it was no longer the water of his nightmares. It was just water. Cold, powerful, and alive. He hadn't conquered his fear, not completely, but he had walked into it. He had paid his debt. And for the first time in a long, long time, as he watched the otters disappear down the river, he felt the possibility of being free.